You know that spice rack you have in the kitchen? Well, winemakers have a spice rack too in the barrels they use for wine production. Come along with us tonight on SIP episode 139 as we break down and learn the importance of wine barrel selection on the flavor of wine. Very excited about this episode. My name is Martin Cody, co-host of Cellar Angels. Co-founder, but also co-host as well. Cellar Angels is a direct-to-consumer wine company specializing and exclusively in only Napa and Sonoma wines. And the reason being is because if you look at the 11,000 plus wineries in the United States, 49.7% of them produce under 500 cases. And 97% of them produce under 20,000 cases. Most of those 11,000 don't have mass distribution around the country, and yet they have wine lovers and wine enthusiasts that they need to get in front of. Cellar Angels affords them a very elegant platform with which to do that. Now, many of you are drinking this wonderful bottle of Ramsgate 2019 Cellar Note Chardonnay this evening, as we and as our host on the patio. But I want to show you where you can actually grab that wine, or where you should have grabbed that wine prior to this evening's broadcast. Now, give me 1 second because I lost that screen. There we go. The Ramsgate Chardonnay, and we'll get into this in a second, is first of all, the Ramsgate Winery is amazing because all of us, if you've been to the Valley, have driven past it. So if you've been to Gloria Ferrar, if you've been to Domaine Carneros, if you've been to a bunch of other ones, you have driven past this winery. I mentioned to Joe when we interviewed him several months back, and it's something that after my 24 years of visiting the Valley, I'm shocked that I've done it so many times, and I'm a little bit angry at myself for having done so, because this is a very magical place. So this 2019 Cellar Note Chardonnay, Sonoma Coast AVA, we're going to get all into it. But more importantly, we're going to get into it from a standpoint of French Cooperage. How does Joe decide on the barrels that he wants to use in his program? Without further ado, let's get back into it. We have Joe Nielsen from Ramsgate. I'll let Joe tell the story, but I want to know how a Michigan State alum finds his way out to God's country and paradise. So Joe, welcome to the show, and apologize for the technology.
No problem, Martin. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we can jump right in. My name is Joe Nielsen. I'm the general manager and winemaker for Ramsgate Winery here in Carneros, Sonoma County, California. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Chardonnay that we are tasting, Martin and I, or at least maybe Meredith and a few others. But to answer Martin's question, I am from originally Michigan. Went to Michigan State with hopes and dreams of becoming a doctor, or at least my parents were hoping I was going to become a doctor. And then I stumbled upon a viticulture and enology program that the university was offering. Naturally curious, I took a few courses, really liked them, slowly built that into my college schedule, much to the disappointment of my parents at the beginning. And actually, I was just talking to my mom about it. She said she still jokes that I majored in alcohol.
She's not alone in how many moms have said that to their children.
Yeah. So initially a little bit concerned about my career path because we did not grow up with wine at the dinner table, nor had I really even known much about wine before I fell in love with the career. So
what grade, like what year in college were you when you came across those courses in the curriculum?
Still, I think a freshman in college. So I was pretty young, 17, 18 years old. I started college when I was 17 and sort of stumbled upon it. The year between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I put in a small experimental vineyard at my family's home, just to kind of teach myself about it and see if I really liked it. And that kind of sparked my interest further, and it slowly built into kind of falling in love before I even had my first glass of wine. So I did not come to this later in life where some people fall in love, have a great bottle of wine. I really fell in love with the process, the the building something from the ground up, literally, and turning it into something that people love to enjoy and drink. So
Now, the early aspirations of medicine and a doctor, was mom or dad a doctor?
nope, neither of them. No, grew up in mid-Michigan. My mother was working for the school district as a school psychologist or social worker, and my dad was a police officer. So neither
Oh,
of
wow.
them. But I think people could probably relate. My mom and dad said I could be anything I wanted to when I grew up, and I took them serious. So myself, I became a winemaker, and my younger sister became a pilot, and neither of us were exposed to any of that growing up.
That is super cool. That's quite diversity too. And tell your father, if he's still with us, thank you for your service, because that is an unbelievable job, and one we need to pay more respect to. So appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
And so you graduate Michigan State, and was there any European travels, or was it straight out to the West Coast to figure out how to get into the wine industry?
Yeah, so right before I graduated my junior year, I worked in New Zealand. And I went for the summer. So I worked basically the winter in New Zealand pruning vineyards for a large brand in the South Island. So that was
Very
my
nice.
first professional job. And then after college, I moved to Northern Michigan, where I made wine in Leelanau County.
Oh, jeez. So what year did you finally get out to California,
So I
and
came out.
how and why?
Yeah, my first vintage in California was in 2008. Um, After making wine in northern Michigan, I enjoyed it. I made some great friends. Really got very excited about the industry, but what you learn about in school versus reality. And I think, again, people can relate with this with any profession. You get out of school, you're a little naive. I may have been accused of being a little impetuous here and there. But I really wanted to know everything and see everything. And I felt like maybe I was a big fish in a little pond, or
Mm.
at the time. So I really wanted to come and see, quote unquote, what I felt was the best wine being made in the United States at the time, and moved to Napa in 2008.
Excellent. And so at that point in time, you had already made wine in Michigan, and you obviously knew foundationally how much barrel influenced the wine. Was there any type of wine that you said, I want to make this style, or I want to, Burgundian, or I want to make New World wine that is very expressive of terroir? What was your philosophy at the beginning on how you wanted to approach it?
I didn't really have a strong sense of who or what I was going to be doing professionally whenever I got there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I've come to sort of appreciate, at least for my career, is that I've been exposed to a lot of different styles of wine, and I've worked with a lot of different grape varieties. So I think it's a culmination of everything that I've been exposed to, but starting in Michigan, where the wines typically have a lot of natural acidity because it's a cool climate area. So I fell in love with really crisp white wines early on, and then moved to Napa, worked with Bordeaux grape varieties, and then spent a large portion of my career at Donelan Wines, where getting exposed to Rhone varieties and starting their Chardonnay and Pinot Noir program in 2009. So I think that kind of shaped it. And then working at Donelan Wines, Joe Donelan was a very large wine collector and was very gracious with his own personal cellar with myself and our team. So that's really, I would say, where my foundation of the style of wines that I really enjoyed really took hold.
Actually, what a cool way to augment, like you mentioned, the generosity and graciousness of sharing some of those old world wines, so that you can start imparting that knowledge of mouthfeel and finish and flavor profile into your mental Rolodex to say, okay, now that I've got that piece of data element, I like the way that actually happened for you. I do want to pause for a second, because I know that we lost some technical time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give the award to The quiz question this past week of an oak barrel will stop imparting aromas, flavors on wine and is considered neutral after how many uses? Brent H. If Brent is on, Brent got the correct answer. He's not on. So the answer is 2 to 3, just FYI. If Julie F., who I got to see this week in person, she is on. So Brent, because you are absent, we're going to take a lot of points out of your account and put them all into Julie's account. So winner has to be present to win. Sandy O, if you were on, you took in third place. Jim B, fast is good. Fast and wrong is not good. So I love the speed. Now we just have to get some accuracy there. Joe, getting back to you, you spent a bunch of time with Donelan, and that kind of served as a little bit of a formation, a totally different environment where you were producing wines to where you're producing wines today. And Cellar Angels know the Donelan name well because we featured several of their wines on the platform. What was some of your biggest takeaways from starting the Pinot Noir, starting the Chardonnay program that you use today at Ramsgate?
Yeah, I think a few things that we started with, and Tyler Thomas at the time was the winemaker and a great mentor to me. But there was a phrase that I learned from a professor who's no longer with us, named Gordon Howell. And he always had this phrase that he'd say, ask the unquestioned answer. And so if you think about that, ask the unquestioned answer. So it's sort of, do not roll with the dogma. Don't do it just because everyone says that's the way you need to do it.
Right.
So we really approached, after sort of doing Rhone varieties quite well, when we wanted to jump into the Burgundian pool, we really didn't want to continue to do what we've already seen a lot of people doing at that time. So native ferments, whole cluster, less alcohol, earlier ripening, more fresh. And again, now I would say that the pendulum has swung and a lot of people are doing that today. But at that point in time, that was not the recipe for success. But what I found with that is we get wines with tons of texture and freshness and whole cluster. And I just was speaking to someone, there's actual compounds that they have now isolated in whole cluster that actually has a sensation of freshness that they can actually say chemically that causes this, like, for lack of a better term, a fresh feel on your nose and your palate. So that from the very first vintage at Donelan with Chardonnay and Pinot in 2009, that is basically how I started making Chardonnay and Pinot and loved it. And obviously I've morphed and evolved over the years, but I would say that's a foundation to how we make Pinot Noir. And it's also how we talk about our wines in general. We love texture, we love freshness, whether it's a Cabernet, a Syrah, Pinot, or Chardonnay, or now Pinot Blanc and Sauv Blanc that we also make.
And I want to pull on one of the items that you said as far as technique. You mentioned native ferments. Tell us a little bit about what that means. And when you use native ferments, what are you choosing? You're choosing to use that instead of what?
Yeah, so just like bread making, you can either go to the store or someplace and buy cultured yeast, and that's been isolated from who knows where to ferment your dough, or in this case, ferment our wines. And that is a business where there's many options of yeast for us as winemakers to use, or brewers use to make beer. But what I have enjoyed over my career is a little stepping back and at least trying to let the vineyard do the work. So encouraging the microflora that's existing in each vineyard that we work with, including our estate here. And whether that has a huge impact on the finished wine, I don't know, but I do feel like there is a uniqueness that sometimes comes from that you can't pinpoint. But it's been something that I've been brought up in my winemaking, and it's a tool that I prefer to use. And if once in a while it does impact something unique, then we did it, and it's unlike anyone else's.
I think it's interesting because you talked about the tools that you have at your disposal to use. And I would love you to kind of if you can, articulate the challenge of wanting the vineyard to speak and sort of staying out of the way of that process of the vineyard and the terroir coming forward, and then B, the tools you use to enhance that desire, and then kind of wrap that, if you're able to, where you learned that or how you decided that that was what you wanted to aspire towards in winemaking.
That's a good question.
It's a big question. It's a three-parter.
You may need to repeat it one more time. Sorry. I got caught on the first word and then.
Well, you talked about having the tools like the native ferments and
Sure.
and weaving that into, but also the minimalist philosophy of letting the vineyard speak and let the terroir be expressed. And then what tools do you use to accentuate that, to make certain that you're not manipulating it? And then how did you come about that philosophy?
I would say that's a in some ways an old world philosophy. Having traveled to France and Italy and talking to winemakers, a lot of French winemakers talk that way. And I'm not just talking that way to mimic, but it's kind of this idea that the farming is more important than my task of putting it and getting it to a state where we can put it in bottles. So to me, I'm much more interested in kind of seeking out uniqueness in terroir than saying that I'm so good at what I do that I can manipulate anything into what I want.
Right.
And sometimes along that journey, you find something that you would not have found otherwise. Like if you approach something as a student versus a master, the vineyard is teaching you things. And it's sort of like a journey with your palate where I don't know where this is going to take me, but I really like the journey and I like where we're heading. And sometimes occasionally we find stuff in that sort of state where the wine is way more compelling to me as both the maker and a consumer than had I tried to enforce my will, if that makes any sense. So we were just actually talking about this. I was downstairs with my new harvest team, tasting some stuff. And it's just kind of the journey in which we've gone in our Sauv Blanc, and that the Sauv Blanc here tastes very different than Sauv Blanc in Napa or in the Russian River. And the style has adjusted to try to understand our terroir. So it is a little bit of a minimalist, but that's in hopes that we can see all the nuance. I think if you overplay your hand, sometimes you lose a little bit of the delicateness of terroir. And I really prefer sort of the expression of a site.
No, I think that's awesome. And I love the phrase that you use of wanting to perpetually be the student versus the master. And I would imagine that as you accumulate more vintages under your belt, there is a urge or a tendency to say, okay, I've got this dialed in, and maybe we all get too big for our britches, so to speak, and to force yourself to always be that student so that you're always learning. I think that's a great way from an analogy standpoint to phrase it. One of the tools at your disposal is obviously the barrel. And since this topic is French cooperage, I think it's endless, the ability of the barrel to impart numerous characteristics on the wine. So how do we break that down and base it upon, your desire of what characteristics you want, how you choose your barrels? And let's just start with high level. How do you choose the barrels that you want to use for the portfolio?
Yeah, it's a pretty complicated process to where we are today. I think if I backed up to where I started, I have to start somewhere. And I consciously remember in 2014, it was kind of an era where in the barrel making business, there's mass consolidation. And then sort of the mid-teens, all of a sudden, all these artisan coopers started popping up out of essentially thin air, and cold calling and going to a lot of wineries and I think I was compelled by some of these conversations I started having at that time,
Right.
and realizing that there's so much nuance that, like, I had already been making wine for many years, yet I never really took a deep dive on that. So in 2014, I started with maybe 4 or 5 Cooper trials, thinking I'll give it 1 or 2 years and then probably come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter. And now 2023, I never have stopped that trial, even though I'm a different company. And now I'm working with 20 different Coopers. And the trials just get more and more complicated. So now I've changed that narrative in my mind too. This is part of my lifelong journey, along with trying to make better wine, is that I'll probably never see it all. And that's okay.
Exactly. I'm going to come back to the trials in a second, but I do want to have you educate everybody on when did you get to Ramsgate and what was appealing and exciting to you that really made you want to take the position?
Yeah, so 2018, I had just finished an MBA from Sonoma State, a wine MBA. I was just about to have my second child and ready for a new chapter in my life. The appeal of Ramsgate is and was then a beautiful place, an incredible team, a good sized estate vineyard where the potential was really, to me, untapped at the time. The first time I talked to the team, that I said, there's diamonds and gold in these hills. We just haven't even started digging. And the last little piece is that we had an incredible culinary program happening here at Ramsgate. And in 2011, when they started this brand, it was sort of the beginning of that food and wine combination in wine country that really didn't exist too much prior. So all of those factors together, a great team, great location, untapped resources, and incredible food. That's what drew me to here.
That's those are 4 pretty good signs that this is where you want to be. So yeah, untapped culinary, untapped wine production potential. And how big is the estate as far as acreage and acreage under vine?
Sure. The property itself is 135 acres. It's shaped like a Bordeaux bottle. For those, I don't know if we'll ever bring up the Google Maps, but it's really kind of, that's a side note. But and then 27 acres of grapevines. A lot of it's fallows land, and there's really not a huge plan to develop it all. Sort of a maybe American philosophy of just letting it be. We have some acreage, but whether or not we develop it is really not a huge goal at the moment. So a lot of nature.
Well, and you talked about the culinary program and the unlimited, vineyard aspect potential. Talk a little bit about the physical facility that you're in, because one of the things that impressed me, actually floored me, was just the space that you have and the number of different, I don't know what you refer to them as, tasting salons or tasting experiences. The one behind me is a large one in the main room, but talk to us about all of the different experiences people can have at the facility.
Yeah. So starting with the facility itself, it is incredibly gorgeous. So designed by Howard Back, and what I think people can see almost immediately when they get here, it's a great combination of bringing the outdoors in. Almost any space that you're at Ramsgate, there's an incredible view of our landscape around our property and a great view of Carneros. It's kind of designed in a horseshoe. We're in a very windy part of Sonoma. So everything's protected for the most part from the wind coming out of the west side of the Petaluma wind gap. The spaces you mentioned, yeah, we have tons of really unique spaces, really well crafted, very easy to have a great glass of wine and enjoy the surrounding area. And then with experiences that we offer anything from a tasting, I would not say a standard tasting, but some delicious wines in a great spot. We have a wine and bites, so that's sort of a sneak peek of what our chef Ruby prepares for sort of the creme de la creme of the wine and food 5-course wine and food pairing that we do 3 times a day. So,
Wow.
and that's a seasonal pairing that chef changes quarterly or seasonally. And the goal is to never repeat a dish, which is a tough challenge.
No, that's a nearly impossible challenge. And I know we're going to continue talking about the barrel program. And I do want to launch our first poll question, which has to do with barrels. And you can't vote, Joe, neither can you, Meredith. So, but you may or may not know the answer. When was wine first put into a barrel? A couple people I'm sure were, the answers are 2500 BC, 1275 BC, 400 BC, and 210 AD. I was surprised to learn this answer. And if any Greek philosophers are out there, there's apparently a person called Hero.us. Hold on a second. Herodotus. I'm being told it's Herodotus, not Hero.us. That's not good. So I'm going to give this 5, 4, 2.5, 1. Final votes. Any guesses, Joe?
I'm going to go with, I was going to say 400 BC, but maybe I'm way off.
Well, I'll let the sipsters determine the correct answer because I had two. There's obviously those gray areas where it's like there was wine put into some sort of a wooden vessel. It was palm wine, apparently. And that was 2500 BC.
Wow.
But then from what I understand, and that was actually to transmit wine from Armenia to Babylon. But then there's another seemingly more authentic source that had it in the 3rd century or 210 AD. So I will wait for, I think it's Hans might be on, who's one of the sharper knives in the drawer, Google engineer. He could also get us the correct answer because apparently Google's good at searching. His brother-in-law is a Google engineer. Let me go to the second one, and then I'm going to get, since we're talking about French oak, and Joe does probably know the answer to this. There are 2 main types of French oak. How do you pronounce that first word, Joe?
Quercus.
Oh, thank God you're here. Quercus petraea and Quercus robur. Which is the finer of the 2? Oh, I see a bunch of people have been cheating. Angels, you're better than this. No searching on the smartphones, please. Pencils down, as we used to say. Now, the irony of this is I do know the answer, but did not write it down. So I'm going to be relying on you, Joe. I'm going to give people 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Actually, I do remember the answer. Thoughts? Joe, do you know this wood?
I always forget. So
the angels have it correct.
Okay, great.
Quercus petraea. Now, it's interesting to me from a French cooperage standpoint, just like you were talking about, you've got 20 different coopers that you're involved with right now, and a dizzying array of complex type of scenarios with regards to how you're testing these coopers. How do you select a cooper, and how do you select a toast that you want on the barrel, and why?
I would say at this point, because we have so many variations, we are probably quicker to make a decision than we were, or when I started kind of this exercise back in 2014. Certain forests have certain flavors. Certain coopers have a certain style. And then within toasting, you have a general idea as a winemaker, low toast or light toast up to a heavy toast. So within that framework, you can have a general idea of what you could expect. If you're just picking a cooper off the street you've never worked with, then all bets are off. You always have to trial it. So there's no guarantee that just because you've worked with that forest and that toast, does it mean anything in the finished product? So it is a long process. Winemaking, we get one try a year. So a trial lasts 12 months typically. So it's a slow moving test. So just because I started in 2014, I really haven't had that many iterations yet. So you have to learn, you have to taste a lot so that you can move quicker and to making a decision, even though those decisions might take 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And then how often, well, first of all, let's define a barrel.
Sure.
So go ahead and give us your definition of kind of the standard barrel.
Sure. For us, we have a very small barrel room. We can store 900 barrels, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But with that being said, I've chosen mostly just to work with 2 types of barrels. French Bordeaux barrels, which are 225 liters, and French Burgundy barrels, which are 228 liters or 60 gallons. So I don't work, and for a few exceptions, I work with a very small barrel called a fouillette, which is a half barrel, but all French.
Interesting. And so I understand the sizes, especially, the Bordeaux and the Burgundy, but I do want to have Mission Control show a picture of toasting, because this is something that not many people get an aspect to see. So you talked light, medium, and or heavy char. So they actually burn the inside of the barrel. And I don't know how scientifically it's monitored with regard to, ooh, that's a little over light and that just goes into the medium. But what type of flavor or influence does that have on the overall wine after a certain period of time?
Yeah, so I think with technology, we're taking something that's can be still very handcrafted, but used in a more scientific way. So a lot of coopers that I've visited can continually measure the temperature within that barrel while it's being cooked. They can also adjust the flame. So now things have turned into not just intensity, so light, medium, heavy, but also light long, a light short, a medium long, a medium short. So length of time the toasting process happens can pull out different flavors. Just like when you're roasting your marshmallow, you can get it nice and golden and slowly cook the outside, or you can get it caught on fire and it's over in a second. So both.
But still good when they're caught on fire and the char is there. Just saying.
Yeah, I would say all degrees of marshmallows are delicious. Don't tell anyone I said that. So
go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, because now you just introduced even more variables as it relates to the barrels, right? So you've got long, light, long, medium, and all of those variables. I can't imagine what the spreadsheet looks like as you're sitting down to taste wine. And when do you have to make the decision during harvest about, when it's coming out of tank, what barrels you're going to put that in? Because you would probably have purchased those barrels 6-9 months in advance.
Right. And so, yeah, as we get into how we pick barrels, it gets really complicated very quickly. So my team and I will taste, and things have changed. The world has changed a lot in the last, I would say, even 4 years. But we typically taste early spring. Because most barrel orders need to be in by March or April. So we're making decisions for the next vintage based on last year's wine. And,
oh, wow.
And thankfully for us, we have so much variety that we can kind of tailor a barrel to what we're seeing and tasting, either in the vineyard or during fermentation, at least if it's a red wine, before we pick our barrels. White wine barrels, it really is based on last year's interpretation of that site or that clone to inform sort of where we want to go. So it's like Thomas Edison. We trial and trial and trial, and we can say, nope, that doesn't work. Nope, that doesn't work. Nope, that doesn't work. And then voila, oh wow, that's great. So then it's sort of a an exercise in just working through all of your options, obviously being smart about it, where I don't need to try something I know probably won't work.
Right.
To find something that, and we kind of call it, we're just turning the dial now. We're just trying to dial it in a little bit, get a more pure picture of what we're trying to make. So
Yeah, I think you could drive yourself crazy with all of the different factors and machinations of the different variables when getting back to what we were talking about earlier, you just want the fruit to speak and really not kind of get in the way. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so to me, and there was a comment earlier about me moving all of our wine to stainless steel for Chardonnay, and it's actually not true at all. I don't use stainless steel for Chardonnay. The goal is to find nuance. To me, a cooper, a barrel is our spice rack. We've all been, there's chefs who like to use salt, and then there's chefs that like to use salt. And a chef that really knows how to use salt is very intentional about that choice. It's not just throw a bunch of kosher salt and voila, you're done. It's more about tasting all of the options of salt. I went to a store in Detroit, Michigan that only sells salt. And I'm like, this is a joke, kind of. But then I'm like, wait a minute. So I walk in and there's 50 different salts to try. And I'm like, oh,
Yep.
okay, now I get it. This is just like what I do with barrels. So it's incredibly a delicate thing. And the goal is to, and Delilah, thank you for the question. I like to be really thoughtful in expressing the fruit, but what a cooper can do is actually shift the perception of that fruit based on the actual barrel. There's barrels that will bring out different fruit components that aren't naturally from that vineyard, or we can play to accentuate that flavor, and it is more present with the right choice of barrel, if that
No,
makes sense.
it makes perfect sense. Did you sign up for the salt program at all in that store? Did you get on the mailing list?
No, but I have still a handful of different salts that I bought. Some of them are smoked, some of them are different
Yeah,
sea salts from all
it's
over
a
the world.
fantastic analogy because you're right. If you're going to pour Morton salt into a dish, it's going to taste completely different than Himalayan salt or, as you mentioned,
Yeah, totally.
smoked salt. So that's a perfect example of that. Walk me through now, and Dahlia is talking a little bit about unoaked and stainless or that aspect, but the portfolio is expansive. So this one is called Cellar Note. Give us a little education on the naming convention and the portfolio overall at Ramsgate.
Sure. And we'll start with Cellar Note because that's what we're tasting tonight. So Cellar Note is sort of that embracing the student versus the master. So when we were talking about this wine prior to its name, to me it was, I wanted to really come to the blend thinking about vintage specific, varietally correct, but unique and evolving, that as maybe the barrels evolve or our techniques evolve or we learn something, this is where my team gets to explore and really have fun and create something unique and special. So each Southern Note wine is numbered, and that it started to signify that. So the 2019 is number 3, and each year it's different. The recipe, quote unquote, changes year to year to sort of embrace the vintage that we're seeing, to really express the best that we can. The term Cellar Note, I had a really great intern in 2018 who was South African, but spent most of his career in Australia. He said, what about a work order in Australia when we're working on blends and working on a wine, we call them cellar notes. And I was like, wow, that is so perfect. That's exactly what I'm trying to get across. So kind of a little bit nerdy, but what we're finding in Meredith from Ramsgate's on tonight, we really feel like we over deliver in this wine. It's a lot of single vineyard wines that other people are producing as standalone wines, where we're electing to really dive deep, understand these sites, and create a cuvee out of those. Whereas, at $56, I think that it's a delicious wine. Others might be charging $70, $80 for that same fruit. So hopefully over delivering there. To back up, we have a Sonoma Coast series. These are wines that, depending on where folks are from around the country, is to me more of a postcard from Sonoma. You get to see interpretations of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, along with Sauv Blanc and Pinot Blanc. They're a little bit of a different label, but silver ram's head. And then you jump up to the top at single vineyard. So these are wines that we have now fallen in love with. We love working with the people, and they're truly one of a kind and compelling. So to me, a single vineyard wine ought to be the 3 C's. In my mind, it's compelling, complex, and complete. These are not just salt or pepper. This is your whole dish. These are delicious and wines that we really love to show off.
It's amazing. And one of the things that stuck with me when I had the privilege of interviewing you back in June for the video while we're out there, I loved and I can appreciate very much your comment about my friends bust my chops all the time because I don't know anything about sports statistics and things of that nature. But I know a vineyard, and I remember a vineyard that I tasted 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I know that flavor profile off that vineyard. So when fruit becomes available, you can grab it because you've indexed that imprint of flavor. Expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to how I approach barrels. And then, yeah, we were talking. I just ran into someone. They're like, "Oh, you're from Michigan. You must be really into sports because every person I meet from the Midwest just loves sports." I'm like, "Nope, wrong guy." But yeah, that is where I nerd out. So I'm constantly hunting for the unknown, whether it's a barrel, whether it's a vineyard, or a technique. So for us, and I taste a lot. I'm a consumer as well with all of your sipsters. I love wine. It's a mysterious world that I still haven't mastered. And most of the vineyards I've ever worked with are here in Sonoma County. And it's such a plethora of terroir and slope and elevation that, I might have stumbled upon a vineyard. My friend showed me a wine from 2012. I tasted it. 8 years later, I see that it's available. I remember sort of that minerality or just a unique signature that, and we slowly bring those into our program. So as much as I try to run a smart business, we also we're artists, and we're constantly sort of searching for the unknown and the next great thing, great flavor, if you will.
Well, I think the 2019 is singing beautifully. So speaking of Cellar Note, why don't we break this down, or have you break it down with regards to flavors, aromas, and pairings? So, or aromas, flavors. So what are you getting on the nose on this right off the bat that kind of reminds you of the 2019 growing season, and what are you getting now, 4 years henceforth?
Yeah, so 2019, Jack asked what makes fruit and weather unique, so to speak. And 2019 for me, if I paint with a big brush, has incredible purity, incredible finesse, really fresh on the palate. All of our wines across the board just have really good personality and good balance. So it was a cold or cooler August, kind of like what we're experiencing right now. So we had great flavor development without compromise on alcohol. To me, balance is really important. It's really hard to make a balanced wine when flavor is not in line with alcohol, is not aligned with acidity. So on the Cellar Note Chardonnay, what I love is there's a vineyard in here on West Side Road that had sort of like fennel bulb and anise. So when I smell it, I get some nice spice. Pairing that with some stone fruit, I get a little pear, maybe a little bit of white peach. With the age, the Cooper and just age is showing a little bit and getting a little bit of brioche bun on it. And some of the Coopers that we work with, I love the ones that have sort of a chai or chamomile spice that come out, and I really get a little touch of that as well. So that's kind of what I'm smelling right now.
And what would you pair this with?
Maybe it's our chef that's really made me a seafood lover, but and I'm not sure she actually paired it with this wine, but she does this poached lobster with vanilla, and it's just unbelievably delicious. So maybe a little bit richer fish or shellfish. And this acidity just cuts right through that richness of if you had lobster tails, just going right for it. But that's what I want right now. If anyone's listening here in Ramsgate.
Yeah, you had me at lobster. And American oak versus French oak?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily consider myself a Francophile, but sometimes the French have figured it out and they're doing a great job. So I prefer French oak over American. And I would say the reason is that they've been doing it a lot longer than us. If anyone's been to a French forest, they've been manicuring these since the 1600s. So they've got a slight head start. Not saying that the Americans can't compete. It's just it's a different ball game over there.
No, it's amazing. They know their stuff, which is incredible. Have you tested American oak with regards to oxygenation and what gets absorbed into the wood?
I have, yeah. I think I would be a bad scientist if I haven't tried. I have over the years, once in a while, thrown in. Someone says, "Hey, you may not like French oak, or I'm sorry, you may not like American oak, but you got to try this one. It's whatever." I've tried it. I just haven't come across something that I truly love, and maybe I'm biased at this point, but I really feel like the way they're cultivating trees in France is a little bit different than what we have right now. And for those that haven't seen a French forest for oak, they're really narrow and very tall oak trees. They do not look like any oak tree I've ever seen in the United States.
Right.
So they're very slow growing. They don't usually harvest until 180 to 200 years old. So there's some patience that's been built in. So even if we wanted to start now, we're 100 and say 80 years away from being in the same ballpark.
And we haven't talked about it, but it's important to a lot of the cellar angels, including myself and Mission Control, with regards to the philosophy around sustainability at Ramsgate. Kind of share with us what your thinking is and how you impart those sustainable measures.
Totally. Without trying to be too long-winded, sustainability has become a really important part to not just Ramsgate, but I would say Sonoma County in general. We have a great community that have a lot of shared values towards sustainability. Sonoma County Vintners implemented something maybe almost 10 years ago to become 100% sustainable. And at this point, we're over 99% sustainable when it comes to grape growing, which is an incredible feat considering there's 60,000 acres plus vineyard land in Sonoma County. To be that close to the goal is impressive. For Ramsgate, we are California Sustainable Wine Alliance certified, both our vineyard and our business. Starting in 2019, we started converting everything to organic. So now 2020 through 2022, we've been 100% practicing organic, and we are now working on our organic certification through CCOF. And then there's things of what I would consider beyond organic. We use a flock of sheep for our first mowing before you really can get tractors into a vineyard. We have hundreds of very pretty little white faces, sometimes black faces, all fuzzy, here to mow. And it's just a great ecological thing and agricultural thing that has become very popular in this area. We as a falconer, she's going to be coming here next week to help keep birds out of the vineyard. And then you and I were talking yesterday. As of yesterday, we just received one of the first electric tractors called a Monarch, which is really exciting. So Meredith and I were also talking about this. It wasn't necessarily a goal of our company to become diesel free or petroleum free, but now that we have one, then we can add that to the list of things that we're trying to continue to sort of foster more and more thoughtful ways of farming that are more sustainable long term.
And this is, I think, incredible because you're right. You look at, from a sustainability standpoint, the imprint of diesel and tractors and exhaust fumes and stuff like that. So to have an electric tractor that is also doesn't have to be driven by anybody, it's autonomous.
Yeah, so I mean, we've only had it for 48 hours, but yeah, that is the goal is, well, not necessarily a goal of ours, but it is an option with that tractor. So once it maps our property, it's constantly memorizing every move we make. And eventually, once it's, yeah, like a Roomba, except you do have to plug it in at the end. So there's a lot of also safety features that once you're actually running down a vineyard row, it helps protect you from running into a grapevine. It protects the driver. Let's say the driver's still on there, keeps us from causing more damage. So it's pretty cool.
No, and I know we lost a little bit of time with the technical difficulties, but I do want to show folks where you're located because I think it's important to recognize when I said earlier that we've all driven past this and to not do that again. So I want to make certain Google Earth is working because I'd be remiss if I didn't show some people some things. So it is, and Joe, you mentioned the wind because I know it can get really windy there, but for those of you that are new, as I said at the onset, Cellar Angel's focus is exclusively on Napa and Sonoma. And when I were to show Ramsgate down here, you could see that they're right at the bottom of the Sonoma County. And Joe, talk to us a little bit about the Ramsgate name and the Ramsgate symbol and the AVAs that are right there.
Yeah, so our name really comes from the location in which we are. Our estate property is in Carneros. So Carneros translate loosely to ram or sheep. So we have the first part, and then you've already stole my thunder. We're one of the most southern wineries in Sonoma County. So we are, in fact, the gateway into wine country, at least from this road that's just to the south. So we are the gateway to wine country. We are the gateway to Carneros. So Carneros is known for its wind. For us, we get two influences. We get one from the Petaluma Wind Gap, which is to our west, a few, less than, say, 25 miles as the crow flies. And then to our south, we're only about a mile, if not less than a mile, from San Pablo Bay. So where San Francisco is, that fog that everyone loves from San Francisco, we get to experience most mornings here at our estate property. Helps provide a little bit of cooling effect in the summer, but also keeps us a little bit warmer in the wintertime. So the benefit of that is we can also grow a warm climate grape like Grenache on our estate because it's a little bit warmer. We get a head start. We're much warmer here in the wintertime than Sonoma Valley, which is to our north.
Oh, wow. And sometimes folks come into the valley and they'll stop at Domaine Carneros as their first stop. And while we love what Eileen Crane has done there over the years, you have already driven past Ramsgate. And in fact, some people will stop at Gloria Ferrar, and that property is exceptionally beautiful as well, but you still have driven past Ramsgate. So when Joe says they are indeed the gateway into the valley, he's not pulling your leg. They are, without question, probably the first winery that you will encounter. And you can see there's the Speedway, Raceway. You're coming in off of 101 and you will come in off of here and take a left to get into wine country and you pass Ramsgate. And as I've said before to people that I've known for years, I'm like, I've driven past the winery and I'm not kidding you, over 100 times. And I'm not going to do it again. If they'll have us, we're going in. And it is an exceptional property. I will drill down a little bit closer. Hang on. I have to zoom in a little bit because it is amazing when you see what Joe is talking about with regards to terroir aspect, elevation, and the proximity to the San Pablo Bay. It's got to be a little chilly there.
Yeah, it's we have two weather stations on site, and we use that's our, it looks like our assistant winemaker's car actually. Yeah, at our property we're typically 5-6 degrees cooler than even a few miles north of us. So that's really the effects of both the wind from the Pacific and the cooling effects of San Pablo Bay. So it is a little bit cooler. It can still be warm. I mean, it is California after all. Hey, look at that. There's sheep in the vineyard. If people are looking, that's pretty impressive. So that would have been probably February.
That is awesome. And I like the first mow is sheep. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now those, do you rent those?
Yeah, you can rent sheep. We actually are now working with two different flocks. We have our winter flock that goes into the vineyard and cleans underneath our vines. And now we are actually hiring another flock to help with fire protection and just general weed maintenance in all of our fallow land. So we have almost 100 acres of just fallow land that will have sheep coming back to us in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, Dalio, you're correct. It's across the track across the street from the racetrack. And it's kind of funny because you might be looking at the racetrack as you're driving by going, I wonder what that is. And if you look too long, you will miss Ramsgate. Joe, how do people come and taste with you?
You can go to our website, ramsgatewinery.com, and click on visit us or visit, or even better, experiences. Meredith's going to be upset that I misspoke there. And we work with Talk, which is a popular platform for reservations, or you can give us a call if you prefer, the human touch. Operator is standing by to help you. We are open Thursday through Monday. It's California, so 11 months out of the year, it's sunny and beautiful.
True that. And it is, again, I can't wait to get back. And we didn't get to partake in the culinary experiences, but that is something to behold because you've got it dialed in. The culinary experiences, the different tasting vignettes, letting the vineyard speak for themselves, the sustainability aspect, the minimalist, the barrel program, everything is working to perfection. And we can't thank you enough for spending some time with us, both in June and this evening. For those of you that are looking for Cellar Angels recordings, you'll find them on the Cellar Angels YouTube channel. I'd like to raise a glass. My glass is nearly empty, so I've got to remedy that. To Joe, who took time today, very busy, as you know, because we just learned all about barrel selection process, which seems to be never ending. But Joe, how will you know you've arrived from student to maybe a little bit above student?
My last vintage as a winemaker.
Awesome. I like it. We're grateful for the team at Ramsgate, Joe Nielsen, and everyone for doing what they do and how they do it, especially the push for sustainability. And also thank you to all the angels out there. We appreciate everything. And we also ask you, be good to one another. Cheers and see you next time.